Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission here, as always, is to take a stack of sources, articles, bios, interviews, the works, and give you that ultimate shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. Today we're doing a deep dive into the life of Greg Giraldo. He died way too young, back in 2010, but left behind this legacy that is, well, it's just a shocking study in duality.
It really is, because when you think of Greg Giraldo, you immediately picture this super quick wit, right? The insult comic, the guy who just destroyed on the Comedy Central roast.
He's absolutely a main feature
yeah,
there.
Total force of comedic, kind of chaotic energy. But then you dive into the source material, the background, and the dichotomy is just, it's startling. His life story, it really perfectly encapsulates this tension between reaching the absolute peak of intellectual achievement, the real rigorous stuff,
Right.
and then choosing or maybe falling into a professional life that's defined by, well, instability, intense self-exposure, and personal chaos.
It's an incredible contrast. We've been looking through all this material, his super high-flying academic record, the kind of abrupt crash of his legal career.
Yeah, crash is a good word for it.
Then the explosive success he found as a comedian, and all the while, these quiet, desperate battles he was fighting with addiction. It's just such a powerful narrative. And the mission for us today, really, is to try and understand why. Why that incredibly sharp, Harvard-trained mind ended up being both his biggest asset and maybe his heaviest burden, too.
Exactly. It goes so much deeper than just the funny guy on TV.
Definitely. Okay. Let's unpack this, starting right at the beginning with the foundations that built this, well, genuine intellectual heavyweight.
Okay, so to really get the scale of the pivot Giraldo eventually made, you have to start with Gregory Carlos Giraldo, born in the Bronx, mostly raised out in Bayside, Queens.
Right.
And his background was culturally rich, His father, Alfonso, was from Colombia, his mother, Dolores, from Spain. He grew up fluent in Spanish, raised Roman Catholic.
So seemingly on a pretty standard path for, achievement within established systems.
Totally. Everything pointed towards institutional success.
And the sources make it clear right away he wasn't just bright. He was, prodigious as a student. Showed this real inclination for academic rigor very early on.
Yeah, he gets an academic scholarship to Regis High School in Manhattan.
Which was a big deal.
Oh, it's huge. It's one of the most prestigious, academically tough private Jesuit schools in the entire country. He graduates from there in '83.
So that's already signaling, okay, this kid is on a track towards elite academic performance. Very early indicator.
And he absolutely stays on that track perfectly. Moves on to Columbia University, gets his BA in English in 1987.
Okay, Ivy League.
Ivy League. And he's involved on campus too, active member of the Psi Upsilon fraternity. He's basically building the perfect resume of a disciplined, successful young man who's playing the long game, aiming for establishment power.
Right, checking all the boxes.
Yeah.
But then, here's the detail, the specific thing that when you think about where he ended up, it should just make your jaw drop. Getting into a top law school isn't just about good grades.
No.
It's about crushing the LSAT, the law school admission test.
And Giraldo, he scored in the 99th percentile on the LSAT.
99th. Let that sink in.
Yeah, just think about that. Out of everyone taking that incredibly specialized, really difficult exam, Greg Giraldo scored higher than 99% of them.
Wow.
That kind of performance, well, it led directly to him getting into and then graduating from Harvard Law School. JD, 1990.
Harvard Law?
Harvard Law. So you've got this insane test score plus the pedigree of a Harvard JD. That is practically a guaranteed ticket to a life of significant wealth, influence, you name it.
It just sets up this immediate, really profound contradiction, doesn't it? This is the kind of intellectual firepower you expect from future Supreme Court clerks or people negotiating huge international corporate deals, maybe future senators.
Exactly, that level.
This is absolutely not the typical academic background of a guy who's going to spend his late 20s sweating under a comedy club spotlight, heckling the audience.
Not at all. And, for a moment there, he did follow the expected script. He passed the bar exam. He landed that super coveted associate position at a major corporate law firm, Skadden, Arps, Slate, Meagher, and Flom.
Skadden Arps. For people who know that world, getting a job there straight out of Harvard Law.
Yeah.
That's like hitting the jackpot, right?
Yeah.
The absolute pinnacle of early career success in corporate law.
Absolutely the pinnacle.
So how long did this dream job last?
8 months.
8 months.
Less than a year. Just imagine the time, the money, the social capital, the sheer intellectual effort poured into reaching that specific peak,
Right.
only for him to just voluntarily jump off the cliff less than 300 days later. It's such an abrupt departure. It really signals that the mind, which absolutely excelled at the abstract concept of law, just did not mesh with the day-to-day reality of practicing it.
And the sources give us some fantastic insight from Giraldo himself about this dissonance he felt. It really hints at this fundamental anxiety that seemed to just plague him throughout his life.
Yeah, he said something crucial. It was like, I've always had real trouble knowing what my actual desires and goals are. I can't even tell you why I thought to go to law school.
Wow. That's pretty revealing.
Isn't it? It suggests his whole trajectory up to that point might have been less about what he truly wanted and more about just following the path of least intellectual resistance, maybe, until his actual self just couldn't take it anymore and rebelled.
And you can imagine the family reaction. The sources mentioned they were understandably deeply disappointed that he just walked away from decades of effort, seemingly on a whim.
Oh, for sure. And then there's this perfect little anecdote that just illustrates how completely removed he was from the actual practice of law, the messy litigation side he tried to avoid with corporate law. So in 1993, his buddy, fellow comedian Jeffrey Ross, gets charged with inciting a riot and some kind of weapons charge. So Giraldo, armed with his shiny Harvard law degree, offers to take the case. Pro bono. Friend helping friend.
Sounds noble. How'd that go?
Total nightmare, apparently. Giraldo later confessed he'd never actually litigated a case before. Ever.
Oh, boy.
And then the prosecutor upgrades the charges. Things get really serious, potentially involving jail time. Giraldo was so completely out of his depth.
I can picture it.
That he apparently almost told Ross just to plead guilty, which would have meant actual time behind bars.
Yikes.
Yeah. The whole situation just fell apart. Giraldo basically had to admit to the judge, look, I am totally inadequate here. They had to scramble, hire a quote-unquote real lawyer to take over the case like a month later.
Wow, what a fantastic but brutal illustration. He mastered the theory, right? The contracts, the logic, the arguments on paper.
Absolutely. Nailed it.
But had zero ability, or maybe zero stomach, for the unpredictable, high-stakes, emotional reality of a courtroom. Which is kind of ironic, considering that's exactly the kind of environment, high-stakes, unpredictable, emotional, he'd later thrive in as a comedian.
Exactly. The parallels are fascinating.
Yeah.
And that whole chapter, the Harvard degree, the brief stint at Skadden, the Jeffrey Ross fiasco, it was such a core part of his identity struggle that Esquire magazine actually profiled him in 2000.
Oh, really?
Yeah, specifically as one of the Harvard law class of 90 alumni who chose a non-law path. It kind of made his career pivot public knowledge part of the narrative about him.
Okay, so the suit gets ditched, Skadden Arps is in the rearview mirror, and Giraldo starts doing stand-up in 1992.
Right, and his motivation for this huge pivot, it wasn't like some deep spiritual calling to the stage. No, the sources suggest it was more like intellectual boredom, maybe, and this sense of superiority that seems directly linked to his academic past.
Okay, that's a really important distinction, because most comedians, you hear stories, they started because they worshipped Richard Pryor or George Carlin growing up.
Right, they loved the greats.
Giraldo, according to him, started because he was watching shows like Evening at the Improv. And he said, his words, he wasn't influenced by the good people, but by the crappy people.
Okay.
His actual quote was something like, man, those guys blow so bad, I can do that.
Wow. So it wasn't admiration, it was assessment.
Exactly. It seems like it was driven by this cold intellectual assessment. This looks easy. This is a puzzle I can solve.
And you can see how that kind of intellectual superiority would then shape his entire comedic style, right? I mean, sure, he did observational stuff, some surreal humor, definitely black comedy. But his analytical mind just naturally excelled at insult comedy.
Right, the dissection.
Precisely. His subjects were pretty broad, current events, everyday life stuff, marriage, being a parent. But he handled it all with this almost like surgical precision. It reflected a mind trained to just ruthlessly dissect information.
And if we really want to connect the dots here, let's go back to Giraldo's own incredibly harsh assessment of his fellow comedians. Because it gives us context, maybe for his own later self-destruction.
Oh, yeah, that quote is something else.
He basically suggested that law, for really smart, motivated people like him, is not hard.
Right.
It's structured, it's rational, you can figure it out. But the real world, and he meant comedy specifically here, that's tricky, that demands, flexibility, emotional management, stuff that isn't just pure logic.
And then he goes on to categorize most working comedians as, and this is his phrase, people who couldn't really work in the real world because they're too disorganized, too lazy, too fucked up, too erratic, too unstable.
It's brutal.
It's incredibly brutal. He's basically describing this chaotic personality profile. But what makes that quote just so poignant and kind of tragic in hindsight is that Giraldo himself, the Harvard guy who started comedy partly out of disdain for the fucked up comics, he became a prime example of that exact instability later in his life.
Oh, man.
He essentially diagnosed the psychological pitfalls that he himself would eventually fall into. It's chilling.
It's the tragic irony, isn't it? He walks into this field thinking his intellect is like a shield protecting him from the chaos.
Right.
But maybe his intellect needed the chaos or created its own kind.
It's a really complex dynamic, and his early career definitely showcased that manic energy, but also his versatility. He very quickly became a regular performer down at the Comedy Cellar in Manhattan.
Which is like the proving ground, right?
Yeah.
The crucible for New York stand-up.
Absolutely, if you can make it there. And he found his way onto TV pretty fast, too. He starred in that sitcom, Common Law.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Didn't last long, did it?
No, very short-lived. He got the role after someone spotted him at the Just for Laughs festival in Montreal back in '95. They only aired, I think, 4 episodes out of the 10 they actually produced.
Still, getting a sitcom lead that early, it shows the industry saw something special right away.
Definitely. They recognized the talent immediately, and then he became a fixture on late-night TV.
Yeah, he was everywhere for a while.
He did Late Night with Conan O'Brien, Late Show with David Letterman, Jimmy Kimmel Live, like dozens of times each, probably.
Which means he was constantly generating new, sharp material. That constant demand suggests he was producing quality jokes at an incredible rate, which again, it speaks to that highly efficient analytical mind.
Exactly. And he was a regular guest on the Howard Stern show, too, always very sharp on there.
Right.
And he wasn't just limited to stand-up either. His voice work shows his range, which is interesting.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, he voiced President Theodore Roosevelt in Sarah Bell's audiobook Assassination Vacation.
Wow. Okay. TR. That requires some gravitas, some historical understanding.
Right. And then completely the other end of the spectrum, he was the voice of this super politically incorrect character, Jihad Joe, in some animated film called What Blows Up Must Come Down.
From Teddy Roosevelt to Jihad Joe.
Exactly. That jump from like serious historical biography to really abrasive envelope-pushing satire. It just highlights that intellectual dexterity again. He could shift gears completely.
Okay, so the 2000s, this is really when Greg Giraldo becomes like a household name, at least for comedy fans. And it's largely through his absolute dominance of the format that probably required the most intellectual horsepower.
The roast.
The Comedy Central roast, yeah. His run on Comedy Central basically dominated that decade from the early 2000s right up until near the end.
Yeah, and even before he became the Roastmaster General, he was honing that aggressive, very current events-focused style on Tough Crowd with Colin Quinn.
Right, from 2002 to 2004. He wasn't just a panelist, he was a writer on that show too.
Exactly. And that show, Tough Crowd, it was essentially just a constant intellectual debate, but disguised as a comedy panel show.
Totally.
Giraldo was perfectly built for that, synthesizing political stuff, cultural issues, on the fly, making it funny, but also sharp.
And maybe the absolute peak of that kind of intellectual satire outside of the roasts themselves was Louis Black's Root of All Evil.
Oh, that show was brilliant and perfect for Giraldo.
It was structured like a formal debate, right?
Yeah.
Giraldo would be an advocate, making this persuasive case for why his topic could be anything, like internet dating or whatever.
Right, versus the opponent's topic, like the war on Christmas.
Exactly, making the case for why his topic was the true root of all evil.
And this is just a perfect example of his Harvard training being completely repurposed for comedy.
Yeah.
He wasn't just, telling set-up punchline jokes. He was constructing forensic satire. He was building an actual argument, using rhetoric, playing with logical fallacies, and layering it with just brutal, targeted humor.
And the results are interesting too, right? He didn't always win the judge's decision.
No, he only won the judge's vote, I think, twice in the 9 times he was on. And this is the key statistic, he won the audience poll 6 times.
Ah, so he knew how to persuade the crowd.
He was the ultimate champion of persuasive argument disguised as entertainment. He knew how to win over the jury, even if the official judge wasn't convinced.
Okay, so stepping back then.
Yeah.
Are we basically saying that the Comedy Central roast stage became Greg Giraldo's ultimate courtroom? And his roast jokes were like the world's most personalized, mean-spirited, but brilliantly crafted depositions.
I think the sources strongly suggest exactly that. Just think about what it takes to deliver a truly great roast performance.
Okay.
You need rapid-fire information synthesis, right? You have to know everything about the person being roasted, about the other comedians on the days, the whole context.
Right, all the dirt.
All the dirt, exactly. And then you have to translate all that data instantly into concise, precise, and usually devastating language.
Yeah.
His ability to craft that complex, layered, often really cruel material, seemingly effortlessly and quickly, that feels like the direct application of his elite legal training, just aimed at insult comedy instead of corporate contracts.
And he wasn't just an occasional participant. He was the heavyweight champion of the roast.
Absolutely. He was in over a dozen of them, roasting figures as totally different as, like, Chevy Chase and Pamela Anderson.
William Shatner, Jeff Foxworthy.
Flavor Flav, Bob Saget, Joan Rivers, Larry the Cable Guy, David Hasselhoff. I mean, the list goes on.
And his job, often, was to be the closer, right?
Yeah.
The guy who came in at the end to just land the most brutal, precise final blows, maybe tying together threads from earlier.
Yeah, he was often the anchor. And his roast material, it was known for its surgical accuracy. He didn't just rely on generic fat jokes or dumb insults.
No.
He would pull out these obscure biographical details, or maybe hint at deep psychological vulnerabilities, and use those as the foundation for the joke. That requires a massive, really well-organized memory and a super sharp critical processor to find the weak spot.
That kind of synthesis, that ruthless logic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does sound exactly like what a top-tier law firm trains you to do. Find the flaw in the argument, exploit it.
Precisely. And beyond just the roasts, he really cemented himself as a major figure for Comedy Central. He hosted that programming block, Stand Up Nation.
Right, which was originally called Friday Night Stand-Up with Greg Giraldo. That was from 2005 to 2006.
Yeah. And he was a judge on Last Comic Standing, too, for season 7.
Okay.
His presence on these shows, it kind of signified credibility, you know, sharpness, a certain intellectual standard within the whole comedy landscape. People knew if Giraldo was involved, it was probably going to be smart.
And he kept putting out his own material, too. He was still very active, touring and recording.
Oh, yeah. Released 2 albums, Good Day to Cross a River in 2006, and then Midlife Vices in 2009. That 2009 one was also his only hour-long special for Comedy Central.
And those specials, they showed more depth, too, right? It wasn't just insult stuff. A lot of self-deprecation about marriage, getting older.
Yeah, really good observational material about the indignities of middle age, parenting, his own life. Still sharp, but broader.
And a lot of fans point to that 2006 movie, Dave Attell's Insomniac Tour.
Oh, yeah, that's essential viewing if you want to understand Giraldo.
Why? Because it showed not just the stand-up, but the behind-the-scenes stuff.
Exactly. You got a glimpse his work ethic, what life on the road was actually like for him. It really illustrated the intense schedule he was keeping up. You know, headlining the Comedy Central Indecision '08 tour, playing massive festivals like Bonnaroo in 2010.
You hosted the Nasty Show in Chicago and Montreal that year, too, right?
Yeah, he was constantly working, constantly processing, constantly performing. It seemed relentless. But yeah, that relentless, intense public career. It stood in really stark contrast to a private life that was deeply complex and, it seems, increasingly fragile.
Right. The sources mention he was married twice. His first marriage was really young, when he was only 23. It only lasted a couple of years.
Yeah, very brief. His second marriage started in 1999 to Marianne McAlpin. He actually met her when she was working as a waitress at Caroline's Comedy Club.
Oh, wow. A comedy club romance.
Yeah. And they had 3 sons together, Lucas, Daniel, and Greg Jr. And you get a sense, even amidst all the chaos in his life, that this family connection was incredibly deep and important to him.
How so?
Well, for one, he had this tattoo on his right biceps. It just read, Marianne, 1/23/99, the date they got married.
Okay. That's significant.
Yeah. And even though they apparently separated for a bit in 2008, the sources say they never actually divorced. It emphasizes that the family unit, it remained this crucial anchor for him, even if it was maybe an unstable one at times.
An anchor in the storm. But the defining internal conflict, the thing that really shadows his whole story, was his battle with addiction, both public and private.
Oh, absolutely. And Giraldo was remarkably, almost uncomfortably candid about his struggles with drugs and alcohol. He wove these really agonizing experiences right into his stand-up act.
Which was, I mean, you could see it as incredibly brave self-exposure, right?
For sure.
But also reading accounts from his friends and colleagues, it was deeply alarming to them sometimes.
Yeah, he went to rehab multiple times. He even announced this moment of triumph very publicly, told Conan O'Brien on his show in 2005 that he'd quit drinking alcohol.
Right, I remember that.
But the struggle was clearly constant, and sometimes it manifested physically, violently. The sources include this really sobering anecdote. One night, apparently intoxicated at Gotham Comedy Club, he punched a wall maybe, and broke 4 bones in his hand.
Oof. Just a physical outburst of that internal turmoil.
Exactly, a manifestation of that self-destructive energy.
And there's another detail the sources reveal, something hidden that speaks volumes about how significant sobriety or the struggle for sobriety was in his life. He had another tattoo.
Yeah, on his left forearm. It was like a tribal design, but it incorporated the number 525.
525, what did that mean?
He was apparently pretty private about it, but his close friend, the comedian Jim Norton, revealed after his death that 525 stood for May 25th.
May 25th,
Yeah.
the date he first got sober.
The date he first sobered up. So this wasn't just, an internal battle he talked about sometimes. It was literally etched onto his body. It shows that his attempts to find serenity, even if they didn't last, were monumental moments in his own life story. He marked them.
Wow. Okay. That really brings us to the core of the tragedy, doesn't it? And the insight that his peers offer, especially in some of those dark side of comedy sources.
Yeah, those are tough to watch, but very revealing.
Fellow comedians, they universally respected his brilliance. Tom Papa, specifically, called his intellect both a blessing and his curse.
A blessing and his curse. That sums it up perfectly.
But why a curse? What was the thinking there?
Well, the sense you get from his friends is that his mind, that supercomputer brain, it just could not and would not shut down. Ever.
Always processing, always analyzing.
Constantly. Friends observed that he seemed to use substance abuse specifically to try and quiet the mind chatter.
So it wasn't necessarily about chasing a high, more about chasing silence.
That seems to be the interpretation, yeah. Trying to medicate this overwhelming intellectual intensity that was always demanding analysis, argument, performance. It was like his Harvard-trained brain was just too loud for him to live comfortably inside his own head.
And that very desire to control and analyze the noise.
Yeah.
It's the perfect counterpoint to what's often required in addiction recovery, right? Which is surrender.
Exactly. And the sources capture this tension perfectly through this piece of advice Giraldo got from another comedian, Rick Scheidner. Apparently, Giraldo was struggling, comparing his career to others, asking for advice about staying sober.
Okay.
And Scheidner just told him, flat out, you have to have acceptance.
Yeah.
You can't outsmart addiction.
You can't outsmart addiction. Wow.
If you just dissect that phrase, it feels like the ultimate thesis statement for Giraldo's tragedy.
How so?
Because he was a master of outsmarting things. He intellectually dominated everything he tried law school. The LSAT, stand-up comedy, the roast format, rationalizing, analyzing, finding the angle.
Yeah.
That was his superpower.
Right.
Yet addiction.
Yep.
It's not a problem that responds well to pure intellect. It seems to require emotional honesty, spiritual surrender maybe, vulnerability, acceptance, things that are fundamentally non-intellectual.
So it was like the ultimate intellectual blockade for him. His greatest gift, the ability to think his way through anything, was the very thing stopping him from accepting the nature of his disease, which wasn't logical.
That seems to be the crux of it.
Yeah.
And his friend Joe Schrank, who's a social worker, he talked about walking in on scenes of Giraldo just deep in self-hatred. It confirms this was a profound internal war raging between that brilliant Harvard mind and his emotional self.
And that internal war, it reached its end in just this moment of profound, utterly devastating irony in September 2010.
Yeah, September 24th. He'd done a show in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and afterwards, the sources say, he got hold of OxyContin, alcohol, and cocaine from a fan he'd met.
Oh, man. And the timing of what happened next.
Yeah.
It's just crushing when you read about it. The very next day, September 25th, he was scheduled to appear at the 3rd annual New York Recovery Rally out on Randall's Island.
Right. An event specifically to celebrate the reality of recovery from addiction and offer hope to those who have yet to find recovery.
And his role. He was supposed to introduce the singer Courtney Love.
Yeah.
The fact that he was due to speak at a recovery rally, but was found unresponsive from a relapse overdose on the exact same day, it's almost unbearable to even process that level of tragic irony.
It's incredibly painful. When he didn't show up for the rally appearance, people got worried. The police were called. They found him unresponsive in his room at the Hyatt Hotel there in New Brunswick.
He was taken to Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital.
Yeah, and he remained in a coma on life support. For 5 days.
Until September 29th, 2010. His family had to make that awful, excruciating decision to remove life support. He was only 44 years old.
Just 44. Way too young.
He was buried out in Hampton Bays, New York, at Good Ground Cemetery. The inscription is simple, but very poignant. Beloved father, always loved, forever remembered.
And the comedy world the grief was immediate and immense. They'd lost one of their absolute sharpest, most reliable, and secretly maybe most vulnerable voices.
The tributes started pouring in instantly.
Oh, yeah. Massive, immediate, and they've lasted. On the very day he died, Jon Stewart honored him on The Daily Show. He renamed the end-of-show segment, just for that night, Your Moment of Greg.
I remember that.
Comedy Central immediately started releasing clips, retrospectives, trying to pay tribute to his huge body of work on the channel.
But the tributes that came later really emphasized the depth of the void he left behind. In 2011, Comedy Central aired a 2-hour special, Give It Up, for Greg Giraldo.
And this wasn't just some minor clip show. This was a major testament to his impact. The lineup of people participating was incredible. Jerry Seinfeld, Sarah Silverman, Dave Attell, Conan O'Brien.
Wow.
Yeah, all these comedy giants talking about his brilliance, his complexity, his struggles. It showed how much respect he commanded.
And his colleagues made sure he was remembered on that stage where he really dominated too, right? The roasts.
Definitely. During the Comedy Central roast of Donald Trump in 2011, several comedians paid tribute to him. And crucially, there was a huge benefit show organized.
For his sons.
Exactly. Called the Big Time Comedy Show, held at the Beacon Theater in New York City. All the proceeds went to help support his 3 boys.
That's great.
And that benefit eventually led to something more permanent, the Greg Giraldo Fund.
Okay, what does that do?
It was specifically set up and dedicated to helping children living within families of addiction.
Wow. That's a powerful legacy.
Yeah.
Taking his own private pain and transforming it into something that could actually help other kids going through similar struggles.
It's a really meaningful way to remember him, and maybe the best little summary of his actual character, capturing that contradiction we keep talking about, the public fierceness and the private warmth, comes from Lisa Lampanelli.
Oh, yeah. The Queen of Mean herself. What did she say?
She recalled being on a roast where Giraldo had just delivered some particularly mean shit, as she put it, directed at her.
Right.
Afterwards, backstage, she was kind of trying to avoid him, maybe expecting him to be cold or awkward. But Giraldo apparently sought her out, gave her a kiss on the cheek, and just sincerely said, "Great fucking job." And Lampanelli said, "That's the real fucking Greg." It showed he could wield that intellectual savagery on stage, but underneath there was this capacity for genuine kindness and professional respect.
The brilliant mind and the good heart. Warring, perhaps. #tag outro. So we started this deep dive looking for that shortcut, right? The way to really understand the complex man behind that abrasive, hilarious persona. And what we found, I think, is just this profound study in contradiction. The 99th percentile mind that somehow chose or was drawn to this grueling, unstable path of relentless self-exposure and risk.
Yeah, Greg Giraldo absolutely managed to channel that incredibly sharp analytical intelligence into his comedy, especially the roasts. He proved that even the most, let's say, chaotic or non-traditional career path can be mastered with the discipline and rigor you might associate with a Harvard lawyer.
Right. He brought that level of preparation and execution.
Totally. But ultimately, that same vast intellectual capacity, that brilliant mind, it provided no shield, no immunity at all against the emotional and personal demons that he battled so openly in his work and clearly so agonizingly in private.
Well, thank you for joining us for this pretty intense deep dive into the life of the tragic brilliance of Greg Giraldo.
Yeah, it's a heavy one, but fascinating. And as we leave you to mull over this remarkable, complicated life, maybe consider that core piece of advice Giraldo himself received. You can't outsmart addiction.
Right.
If Greg Giraldo, armed with truly one of the most brilliant, rationalizing, analytical, legal minds of his generation, if he could not reason his way or analyze his way or intellectualize his way out of his personal struggles, what does that tell us? What does that suggest about the fundamental, maybe non-intellectual nature of things like self-acceptance, self-care, maybe even surrender?
It's a powerful question. What boundaries, maybe in your own life, whether they're personal and professional, what boundaries are you trying to outsmart, trying to logic your way around instead of perhaps just accepting them? Something to think about.